welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a closer look at some source material that's had, well, a huge impact on millions. Excerpts from Norman Vincent Peale's classic, The Power of Positive Thinking.
A really influential book.
Totally. And this isn't just, light reading. The author himself calls it a practical, direct action personal improvement manual. So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack the core principles, the techniques, the big ideas in these excerpts. Figure out how Peale claims they work and see what valuable nuggets we can maybe pull out for your own life, your challenges.
That's right. And the material we're diving into, it presents what it calls applied Christianity.
Applied Christianity. Okay.
Yeah, and it's framed as a simple yet scientific system of practical techniques of successful living that works. That's the claim.
Simple yet scientific. Interesting combo.
It is. So we'll be exploring Peale's perspective on using faith and positive thinking to tackle common struggles, things like, self-doubt, worry, stress, unhappiness. But strictly based on what the text itself says.
Got it. Okay, let's dive into that first huge idea he hits right away. Believing in yourself. Why is that so foundational for him?
Well, according to the source, he argues pretty strongly that you simply cannot be successful or, truly happy without confidence in your own abilities. It's presented as the absolute starting point.
Makes sense.
But on the flip side, if you do manage to develop what he calls sound self-confidence, well, then you open the door to achieving things.
Okay. And where does he say this lack of confidence, this kind of inferiority feeling, where does that stem from?
The book points to various causes, actually, including experiences from childhood, which makes sense.
Yeah, common theme.
Right. It even makes this interesting contrast between people who get, high grades in school and those who get real A's in life.
Oh.
Suggesting that just being good academically doesn't always translate to that inner confidence you need for, life success broadly.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Peale presents what he calls the greatest secret for eliminating the inferiority complex, which he basically defines as deep self-doubt.
And that secret is?
Filling your mind with faith.
Ah, okay. Specifically, he talks about tremendous faith in God. And the claim is that that faith, in turn, gives you a humble yet soundly realistic faith in yourself.
So it's a dynamic. Faith in God leads to faith in self.
That's the connection he draws, between faith in a higher power and your own self-belief.
And how does the book say you acquire this kind of powerful dynamic faith? Is it just about wanting it?
Oh, not at all. The text is actually quite practical about it. It says it's acquired through prayer. Lots of prayer.
Lots of prayer.
And through reading and really absorbing the Bible and then actively practicing its faith techniques. He makes a point that what he calls surface skimming, formalistic, and perfunctory prayer is not sufficiently powerful.
So it needs depth, active engagement.
Exactly. It needs to be deep and active.
Speaking of practical application, there's that fascinating story about the traveler, the one who overcame his insecurity using a wonderful plan.
Yes, that one.
Yeah.
He put clips on his car's instrument panel, right?
Yeah, and attached cards with Bible verses.
Right. And while driving, he'd read these cards, memorize the words. The claim is this practice helped him learn to think differently, to stop drinking fear and defeat thoughts.
That's a vivid phrase.
It is. And Peale credits this deliberate thought conditioning, from the cards with the change. It sounds like a very physical, tangible way to implement that mental shift he's talking about.
It does. And that really ties into a core principle the book presents. Formulating and stamping, indelibly on your mind, a mental picture of yourself succeeding.
And holding on to it.
Holding on to that picture tenaciously.
Exactly. Peale argues that confidence really depends on your habitual thoughts. It's about what you think most of the time.
Right. Think defeat, feel defeated.
Pretty much. But if you practice thinking confident thoughts, you can develop a strong sense of capacity. He presents thought as a practice, almost like, exercising a muscle.
And he doesn't stop there either. The source offers these 10 simple, workable rules for overcoming inadequacy attitudes and learning to practice faith. Like direct steps you can take.
Right, those steps. Like mentally picturing success, deliberately voicing positive thoughts when negative ones pop up, and minimizing obstacles in your imagination instead of, building them up into huge monsters.
Yeah, that's a big one.
There's also an interesting point about not being awestruck by other people or trying to just copy them.
Oh, that fourth one is insightful, isn't it? The idea that lots of people who look confident are often just as scared and doubtful inside as you might be.
It does kind of level the playing field, yeah. Makes them seem more human.
Totally.
And other steps, like repeating specific Bible verses daily, if God be for us, who can be against us, is the example given. 10 times a day, he suggests.
Wow, 10 times.
Believing you receive power as you do it. The source also suggests seeking help from a professional counselor or minister, which is practical advice.
Good point.
And figuring out your own 10 points of strength. Using affirmations like, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthened me. Wrapping yourself in thoughts of God's presence and actively believing God is helping you right now, not just someday.
So it's a real mix, isn't it? Mental discipline, spiritual practice, even getting external support when needed.
It's quite comprehensive in that way.
Okay, so moving from overcoming self-doubt, Peale puts a lot of emphasis on something else that seems pretty fundamental for well-being. The power of a peaceful mind.
He really does. There's that story you remember about the man who had a sleepless night. Felt like he had an earful of trouble just from listening to the news.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that sometimes.
Definitely. And the source links that lack of inner peace to the physical effects of noise.
Noise.
Yeah.
How does that factor in? Like, literally noise.
Yeah, literal noise, but probably metaphorical noise too. Peale notes scientific experiments suggesting noise reduces efficiency, and interestingly, that our subconscious mind never completely tunes it out, even when we're asleep.
Huh. Didn't know that.
Silence, on the other hand, is presented as healing, soothing, healthy. But it's not just about external quiet. The core idea seems to be adopting what he calls a relaxed attitude of acceptance of God's gift of peace.
Acceptance. Okay, that telephone prayer anecdote really captures that idea, doesn't it? Praying together over the phone.
Believing God is at both ends of this line and in between.
Yeah.
Yes, and the result claimed for the man receiving the prayer. He felt clean inside and happy and peaceful for the first time in months. It's presented as the power of that shared faith and just accepting peace.
And what about letting go of the worries that, steal that peace? The book offers a technique for that too, right?
It does. It suggests picturing yourself dropping worries overboard every evening at sunset, like physically tossing them away.
Overboard at sunset. I like that visual.
The idea is to develop the psychology of casting them entirely out of your consciousness. He ties it to the Bible concept of forgetting those things that are behind, letting go.
But just emptying the mind isn't enough, is it? Peale says you need to fill it with peace. You can't just leave a vacuum.
Exactly. The technique of suggestive articulation is recommended.
Suggestive articulation? What's that?
Basically, repeating peaceful words like peace or serenity aloud. The claim is that words themselves have profound suggestive power and can genuinely affect your physical and mental state just by saying them.
Interesting.
Reading Bible passages is also suggested, saying they have strong therapeutic value. He shares an anecdote about a businessman who found peace this way, even reading the Bible on the sly at first because he was maybe embarrassed.
It makes sense, though, that the words we use, even just to ourselves, can shape our thoughts and attitudes. Like, if you discipline your conversation to be more peaceful,
you'll likely end up generating more peaceful ideas. Precisely.
Yeah.
And the book also points to external sources of peace, like spending time in nature. There's that lovely anecdote about finding peace while driving through an autumn landscape.
Stopping just to look at a radiant hillside reflected in a lake.
And feeling deeply refreshed.
Yeah.
Being reminded of the psalm, "He leadeth me beside the still waters."
Peale suggests that the silence of the great forest or of the far-reaching plains that, our ancestors might have known, that's something modern life, especially in America, has kind of lost.
And this ties directly into managing tension, which the author claims produces actual toxic poisons in the body and leads to emotional illness.
Toxic poisons.
That's the term used. He recommends deliberately reducing your pace and tempo, slowing down. Cites Jesus' advice. Come and give yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while. It's about intentional rest and withdrawal from the rush.
Like that physician's whimsical prescription for the super busy businessman.
That's a great example. The doctor told him to take off 2 hours every single workday for a long walk.
2 hours.
And a half day off every week just for contemplation. It sounds pretty radical, maybe impractical for some, but the book presents it as necessary for certain temperaments to avoid burnout.
Makes sense.
Another man found peace just by starting his day quietly, singing hymns and happy songs. Found it a releasing mechanism.
So practical steps are really key here. Consciously thinking peaceful thoughts daily. Caring for your mind like you care for your body.
Yes, exactly. Like bathing or exercising the body, you need to practice caring for the mind. He suggests sitting quietly and passing peaceful thoughts through your mind, maybe memories of nature scenes like the one we mentioned.
And crucially, Peale says, deliberately stopping for maybe 10 or 15 minutes every day, even especially in the busiest part of it, to actively practice serenity.
Right. He recounts doing this himself in a hotel room before giving a lecture, putting his feet up, reading a psalm, consciously affirming God's peace just to combat the pre-lecture tension.
Taking that pause.
And the source gives a very specific recommendation here too, reciting Isaiah 26.3. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Reciting it slowly, reflectively. It's called a perfect antidote to fuming and to fretting. There's even a suggestion, maybe a bit controversially, to practice being somewhat phlegmatic or apathetic, even indifferent.
Really?
Or sluggish for highly organized, driven individuals as a way to prevent emotional breaks. Though he does caution against losing your responsiveness entirely, it's about balance.
It's a striking idea, though deliberately slowing yourself down is a technique for mental health.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about energy. Peale makes a strong connection between our thoughts and our physical state here too.
He really does. He claims how we think we feel has a definite effect on how we actually feel physically.
So, mind over matter, basically.
In a way, yeah. The idea is, if you think you're tired, your body tends to accept that suggestion. But if your mind is intensely interested in something, you can often keep going much longer than you thought possible. We've probably all experienced that.
Right. And the source material posits that religion, specifically the principles of Christianity scientifically utilized, can tap into a reservoir of boundless power in consciousness, leading to this continuous flow of energy.
Scientifically utilized Christianity, providing energy.
Oh, yes, it's presenting faith as a direct source of vitality. And this energy, Peale argues, isn't necessarily limited by age or circumstance. He identifies key factors that drain this energy: fear, resentment, inner conflicts,
The usual suspects.
and the abnormal, sort of unnatural pace of modern life. Sound familiar? Those are many of the same things that steal peace and create worry in his view.
It does all loop back, doesn't it? So how do you get more energy, according to this approach? What's the technique?
Well, a key concept he presents is getting your personality speed synchronized with the rate of God's movement.
Synchronized with God's movement. What does that mean practically?
Entering the proper tempo of living. The claim is that truth itself vibrates to God's tempo. And you can find this rhythm in unexpected places, like, yes, a church, but maybe even a factory.
A factory, like the story about the industrialist friend.
Exactly. That friend told Peale that the best workmen in his plant weren't necessarily the strongest physically, but the ones who got into harmony with the rhythm of their machine.
Ah.
He didn't get tired, he claimed, because they were flowing with the work, not fighting against it. He even believed the machine itself was an assembling of parts according to the law of God.
Wow. That's a really interesting perspective, seeing divine order even in machinery and connecting with that order to gain energy. Very unique.
It is. There's also that other unique suggestion for the professor who is suffering from exhaustion.
Oh yeah, the 6-month plan.
The 6-month prescription, right? Spending time outdoors, chopping wood, digging, reading the Bible, and fishing.
Quite the retreat.
The idea is to completely saturate the mind with Bible passages and connect with nature and physical labor to become a new person. It sounds like a total mental and physical reset, grounded in nature and scripture.
And inner harmony is key too, right? Often restored through prayer.
Yes, inner harmony is linked to the harmonious functioning of body and soul, which directly impacts energy levels.
And that connects to the physiotherapist anecdote, the one who said, God works through my fingers.
Yes. She told a nervous patient that and then encouraged him to pray for God's relaxation inwardly. It's presenting healing and energy flow as being deeply tied to that spiritual connection and relaxation.
So prayer isn't just devotional.
Peale suggests studying prayer not just devotionally, but from an efficiency point of view, using what he calls scientific spiritual practice that goes beyond just rote, stereotyped procedures.
Efficiency point of view. Interesting phrase for prayer. So prayer is a practice for shaping your inner state and your energy flow. Building on that, the source really digs into specific techniques and the power of prayer itself.
It really does. The idea of praying with others, for example, is supported by quoting Jesus, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Suggests there's power in that collective focus.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the concept of agreement in prayer, too.
Also cited, if 2 of you shall agree on earth, it shall be done for them of my Father. The book positions the Bible as a kind of textbook of spiritual science,
Textbook of spiritual science.
suggesting that using the formulas outlined within it is the proper way to employ this science. It frames it as a very practical manual for spiritual principles.
And there's that remarkable anecdote about the man who started a business in just a little hole in the wall.
Yeah, by filling it supposedly with optimistic prayers and thoughts.
Right. He believed that hard work, positive thinking, fair dealing, right treatment of people, and the proper kind of praying always get results.
The image of this man living by prayer, constantly asking God about daily decisions, what will I do about this, Lord, is really striking. It illustrates taking that concept of partnership with the divine very literally.
It really does. And another key technique the book presents is to picturize.
Visualization again. It keeps popping up, doesn't it?
It seems central.
It's presented as pretty basic psychology, tied to the realizable wish. The claim is straightforward. People who assume success tend to have success. And this involves creating a clear mental picture of your goal and holding it strongly, believing the objective is sound.
The anecdote about the wife visualizing her husband, picturing him sitting in his old chair, that's a really powerful example of this picturized technique in action, isn't it?
It is a very vivid example.
Yeah.
She pictured him doing things they used to do together, even as he was drifting away from her. She apparently did this for 90 days straight.
90 days, that's dedication.
And the author claims this intense visualization and belief contributed significantly to him changing his mind, deciding he couldn't get along without her, and abandoning the idea of divorce. The source doesn't shy away from saying that people who use this method seriously get astonishing results.
That's a pretty bold claim. Astonishing results. There's also that more unusual prayer practice mentioned, praying for strangers.
Yes, Peale mentions doing it himself on a train, just sending out affirmative prayers for people as he passed them, like little mental blessings. He also cites Frank Laubach's method of swishing love and prayers all around the place. Peale recounts trying it himself in a Pullman train car, and apparently had an unexpected positive interaction with someone who had been quite obnoxious just moments before.
Swishing prayers. Interesting image. So specific prayer techniques are actually listed out. Beyond visualizing and talking to God about everything, what else does the source suggest?
Peale outlines a few more specific practices. One is closing your eyes and concentrating briefly on God's presence, frequently throughout the day, just short check-ins. He also emphasizes not always asking for things, but making sure to also affirm blessings you've received and just give thanks. Gratitude is key.
Right.
Praying with belief for your loved one's protection is included. And crucially, it states you should never use a negative thought in prayer. Only positive ones get results, according to this framework.
Only positive. No room for doubt in the prayer itself.
Seems so. And always express willingness to accept God's will, whatever that may be. And finally, make sure you're asking for things that are righteous and honest. It's quite a comprehensive list of guidelines for framing your communication with the divine.
It really lays out a whole system for how to interact with that higher power he talks about.
Yeah.
Let's shift focus slightly. Peale talks so much about inner states impacting external results, and happiness seems like a huge part of that. The source material makes a pretty clear statement on happiness, doesn't it?
Oh, it's very direct. People are just about as happy as they made up their minds to be.
Wow, that's simple.
That's the assertion. Unhappiness, conversely, is described as the easiest thing in the world to accomplish simply by choosing it and telling yourself things aren't going well.
So it's presented as a conscious choice, even if it often doesn't feel that way in the moment. The author claims happiness is achievable, and there's even a formula for it.
He contrasts that unhappy, complaining woman on the train with the man who is just radiating happiness, smiling, asking people questions, even handing out pencils randomly.
The pencil guy, yeah.
And when asked how he maintained that attitude, the man's answer was simple: just by prayer, man. It ties happiness directly back to Peale's core methods again.
And unhappiness is, what did he call it, self-manufactured?
According to the source, yes. Manufactured by thinking unhappy thoughts, habitually taking negative attitudes, like always expecting things to turn out badly, and saturating your consciousness with all those negative states we've been discussing: resentment, ill will, hate, fear, worry.
Right, all the energy drainers. So the formula for happiness must involve actively counteracting those things. How does Peale suggest you actually produce happiness?
He suggests starting the day, like right when you wake up, by saying aloud 3 times Psalm 118.24, but personalizing it. This is the day which the Lord hath made. I will rejoice and be glad in it.
Saying it out loud 3 times.
Repeating it strongly with a positive tone to deliberately set the day's mindset.
Affirmations seem really key throughout this. What other specific ones are recommended for happiness?
While you're dressing or shaving, the source suggests saying affirmations like, I believe this is going to be a wonderful day, or I believe I can successfully handle all problems that will come my way today.
Okay.
Also, I feel good physically, mentally, emotionally, and expressing gratitude for blessings. The core idea is to affirm happy outcomes at the very start of the day to help create those conditions mentally.
And what about human connection? Does that play a role in this happiness formula?
Absolutely. Peale presents human love and goodwill as another basic principle for happy living. He brings up the pencilman anecdote again, explaining the man said, prayer helps overcome pain, making it hurt less, even if the source of the pain doesn't magically disappear.
Makes sense.
He also recounts advising a grieving orphan girl to offer a prayer of thanksgiving, not for the loss, but for the fact she had her mother for a long time, and, in his views, still has her spiritually. It's about finding perspective and connection through faith.
The book also describes gaining happiness through revitalized spiritual power. What does that look like?
Yeah, there's the anecdote about the party. It was filled with town leaders, businessmen, lawyers, doctors, teachers, and so on, and they were apparently having a wonderful time just talking naturally about God and sharing stories about how their lives had changed through faith.
So it wasn't stuffy or solemn?
Not at all. Peale makes a point.
Yeah.
Anyone who thinks religious people can't laugh and be gay, in the old sense of joyful, should have been there.
So happiness isn't just a solitary pursuit in this view. It can be a shared experience rooted in faith. Since happiness is determined by thoughts, dealing with negative thoughts like depression and discouragement must be absolutely crucial.
It is. The source suggests you have to actively drive these thoughts off through determination and also using a systematic technique of inserting healthy spiritual thoughts and visualizing their healing influence.
Like replacing the negative with the positive.
Exactly. The businessman who supposedly did this for 3 weeks and then had new happiness just burst upon him is presented as proof this method works if you stick with it.
And what about particularly difficult negative emotions like anger and resentment? Peale addresses those head-on, doesn't he? And links them quite strongly to physical health issues.
Oh yeah, very strongly. He calls them attitudes linked to ill health,
Yeah.
using terms like gurgitis. Yeah. Mentions high blood pressure surges from anger, chronic aches and pains, potentially stemming from smoldering grudges, even emotional colds. The source is adamant that the suffering caused by these emotional states is just as real and respectable as suffering caused by germs.
That's a really powerful idea that our emotional state can manifest physically in such specific ways. So what techniques does the book offer for managing anger when it flares up?
Several very practical ones, actually. First, resisting the physical expression, consciously keeping your hands from clenching, keeping your fingers straight.
Interesting. Physical control first.
Then, deliberately reducing your tone of voice to a whisper. It's hard to yell in a whisper.
True.
Also, slumping in a chair or even lying down. He makes the observation that it's hard to get mad lying down.
Chuckles slightly. I can see that. What else?
Saying aloud to yourself, don't be a fool, this won't get me anywhere, so skip it. Just interrupting the pattern. Recognizing how consuming anger is. Trying not to take arguments too seriously.
Perspective.
And making each irritation an object of prayer. Using that snipping method again, like we saw with worry. Weakening anger, piece by piece, one irritation at a time.
The snipping method again, yeah.
Asking yourself if the anger is really worth what it is doing to me emotionally. And praying specifically for the other person involved. May God's love and mine flood my soul.
Yeah.
Forgiving 70 times 7, which is 490 times, really emphasizing repeated forgiveness.
Wow, 490.
And ultimately, the final step suggested is consciously allowing Jesus Christ to take control of the situation and your reaction. It's a whole range of practical, psychological, and spiritual steps.
It definitely gives you a lot of tools to work with for those tough emotions.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about worry specifically now. Peale treats worry almost like a bad habit.
Yes, exactly. And he claims it's a habit that can be broken, primarily by believing you can break it, with God's help.
Believing you can break it is the first step, and a key practice recommended is emptying the mind daily, particularly right before sleep. Why then?
The goal is to prevent worries from sinking down into the subconscious mind while you sleep. The technique involves visualizing all your anxiety and fear flowing out, like draining water from a basin.
A mental flush.
Pretty much.
What?
And there's a specific affirmation that goes with that visualization.
Right. What was it?
With God's help, I am now emptying my mind of all anxiety, all fear, all sense of insecurity. You repeat that slowly 5 times.
Okay.
And then you follow it by affirming, I believe that my mind is now empty. It's a deliberate mental and verbal release practice.
So the core principle here, again, similar to self-doubt, seems to be that mastering faith automatically masters fear. Is that right?
That's the argument. Peale argues that fear tends to create the very conditions you fear. He cites Job 3.25. The thing which I greatly feared has come upon me. Belief, conversely, is claimed to actualize the object of your faith, referencing the Bible verse, according to your faith be it done unto you.
So you get what you focus on, essentially, fear or faith.
That's the idea. The fundamental shift needed is moving consciously from a state of fear to a state of faith.
And the snipping method comes up again as a strategy against worry. He really likes that one.
He does. It's presented as very practical, like cutting branches off a big worry tree. You snip off the little worries first, the manageable ones. You consciously reduce using worry words in your daily conversation.
Worry words.
And you deliberately practice turning worry thoughts into faith thoughts the moment you catch yourself worrying.
There are several anecdotes in the book to illustrate this, right? Like the woman who started her day just affirming, I believe, I believe, I believe, and saw positive changes around her.
Right. And the man who tried to schedule specific worry time each day,
Oh yeah, that one's great.
but found he couldn't actually make himself worry effectively when he approached it systematically like that, because it just seemed illogical when faced directly.
That really highlights the irrational nature of a lot of worry, doesn't it, when you try to pin it down? And the worry basket technique, what was that?
That was a businessman's method. He would literally write down his worries on slips of paper,
Okay.
put them in a basket, which symbolized putting them into God's hands, and then later, maybe the next day, when he took them out to look at them again, he'd often find they didn't seem nearly as difficult or insurmountable anymore.
It's like a physical act of surrendering control.
Exactly. A tangible ritual.
And there was another businessman's evening prayer routine mentioned, giving the day back to God.
Yes. Ending a day with something like, mistakes or successes, victories or defeats, the day is over, and I'm through with it, so I'm giving it back to you. Amen. Peale presents this as a powerful way to dramatize finishing the day, truly letting it go, and setting your face towards the future, unburdened by the past day's events.
Closing the mental tabs for the day. So how does all this apply to problem solving more broadly, beyond just worry?
Well, the techniques overlap. There's that put it in God's hands method, but also the idea of actively conceiving of God as a partner.
A business partner, almost.
Yeah, the practice is to believe God is as real and accessible as a close friend or a business partner. You talk matters over with him, believe he hears you, and believe he impresses your mind with the proper ideas and insights needed. The key is assuming the solutions that come will be guided by truth.
Like the anecdote about the businessman who felt he was totally sunk financially.
Right. He explicitly states he decided to take God in as a partner, saying something like, I put my business, myself, my family, and my future in your hands. And according to the source, the God-guided ideas that followed led to success. Peale claims this divine human relationship technique has produced truly amazing results for people.
Amazing results. It sounds like the level of faith you have directly correlates with the results claimed in the book.
Peale actually scales it quite explicitly. Little faith gives you little results, medium faith gives you medium results, great faith gives you great results.
Okay, so more faith, bigger results.
But he's quick to add that even tiny faith, what the Bible calls mustard seed faith, can still do amazing things. He references Matthew 17.20. So even a little bit is powerful.
And the story of Maurice and Mary Alice Flint seems to be the central example of that mustard seed faith actually put into practice, right?
Yes, they are presented as people who were essentially failures by conventional standards. They read about mustard seed faith, decided to apply it literally, created a business called Mustard Seed Remembrancers,
Catchy name.
and it became hugely successful, apparently helping thousands of people. They attribute their entire turnaround to finding and acting on that small seed of faith.
Wow. The source even provides a multi-step method specifically for problem solving, doesn't it? Like a checklist.
It's a 10-step process, yeah.
Yeah.
It starts, predictably, with praying about the problem. Then, stating the problem, clearly getting specific. listing possible solutions or outcomes.
Okay, logical steps so far.
Then, assembling all the relevant facts impartially, listing those facts out on paper. Then, praying again, specifically for God's illumination on the facts.
Praying over the data.
Kind of, yeah. The crucial steps involve consciously believing and seeking God's guidance, and then trusting the insight or intuition that arises from that process. Taking action like going to church or simply letting your subconscious work on the problem is also suggested.
And the final step.
The final step claims that the answer that develops through this systematic, prayerful process is the right one. It's presented as a very structured, faith-based approach to tackling challenges.
It's certainly a very structured way of integrating faith into practical decision-making. Shifting gears again, but still related, the source material makes a really strong, maybe even controversial for some, assertion that religious faith is a factor in healing.
Yes, a very strong assertion. And it provides what it considers evidence for this, claiming it's the operation of actual spiritually scientific laws.
Spiritually scientific laws.
Peale notes what he sees as a growing emphasis on healing in modern religion at the time, suggesting it's actually a return to original Christian practice. He highlights that the word pastor itself comes from a root word meaning the cure of souls.
Interesting etymology. And he connects this to the very concepts of health and religion themselves.
He does. He points out that holiness derives from wholeness, and meditation sounds a lot like medication. He explicitly pushes back against the idea that Bible teachings and science cannot be harmonized, particularly when it comes to healing.
And the link between our emotions and our physical health comes up again here, maybe even more strongly than before.
Absolutely. Resentment, hate, ill will, jealousy, vindictiveness, these aren't just presented as bad feelings, they're described as attitudes that actively produce ill health.
Produce it. How?
By causing physical symptoms and lowering the body's resistance. The source cites examples like anger causing actual stomach sickness, a man supposedly dying of grudgitis, that word again, and measurable blood pressure spikes linked to anger. Physicians quoted in the book apparently linked a high percentage of sickness directly to maladjusted minds and souls.
That's a powerful framing that your mental and spiritual state can directly impact your physical well-being to that significant extent. The source shares some pretty compelling anecdotes about faith healing, too.
Yes, they're quite striking.
Yeah.
Like the woman supposedly cured of a tumor simply by feeling the presence of the healing Christ and through prayer. Or the man healed of a serious heart condition after praying with simple confidence and feeling a tangible rising tide of strength.
Wow.
Peale describes these healings not as replacing medicine, but as combining the able ministrations of his physicians with the equally wise application of faith. It draws on both the body's natural recuperative power and the restorative forces resident within the mind. It's presented as a synergy.
So it's not necessarily an either-or situation. The book advises using medical science and faith treatment together.
Precisely. When you or a loved one is ill, the advice given is clear. Definitely use medical science, but also practice faith treatment. Don't criticize others' methods if they differ, and ideally use both approaches in concert.
Okay.
There's also a profound point made about surrendering a loved one during a serious illness, that matching your intense desire for them to live with a genuine willingness to relinquish him to God is seen as somehow necessary for the healing process to be most effective. A kind of letting go.
That's a difficult concept, and visualization comes into play here as well.
Yes, visualizing health, sinking deep into the subconscious mind, is suggested again. Based on that recurring idea that the subconscious is where what we believe we usually get.
Right.
So if your deepest real thought is negative or fearful about the illness, the results tend to be negative. If it's positive and faith-filled, the results are claimed to be positive.
Like the anecdote about Bill, the sales manager with the mental filth.
Exactly. He's presented as an example of fleshing out negative thoughts and perhaps guilt through confession and prayer, which led to a dramatic physical and mental release, and even improved his job performance significantly. It underscores that physicians, quote, mentioned, it is not a question of whether an illness is physical or emotional, but how much of each.
It seems they're often intertwined in this view, and Peale discusses the emotional roots of physical ailments even further, right? Circling back to linking things like chronic aches and pains to those smoldering grudges.
Even grudges you might not consciously realize you're holding on to. And things like emotional colds in children being potentially linked to insecurity, broken homes, jealousy, or conflict between parents. The source repeatedly stresses that this kind of suffering is not imaginary. It's presented as a real physical manifestation of underlying emotional or spiritual distress.
It really ties so many threads together, doesn't it? From self-doubt and worry all the way to physical health. It all seems to stem from the state of the mind and spirit in this framework. And that leads us right back to the core overarching principle Peale emphasizes throughout, the power of positive thinking and belief itself.
Right back to the title, essentially. And a foundational principle he attributes to the psychologist William James. Human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind.
Alter your attitude, alter your life.
And that famous line, as you think, so shall you be. The direct implication is that you must actively, consciously flesh out old, tired, negative thoughts and deliberately replace them with fresh, new creative thoughts of faith, love, and goodness.
And these powerful personality remaking thoughts, the source claims, are found specifically where?
Primarily in the Bible and the principles of Christianity as he interprets them. The anecdote about the man whose whole thought pattern shifted dramatically from negative to positive after repeatedly using Psalm 27.1 and 3, "The Lord is the strength of my life, in this will I be confident," is presented as direct evidence of this power.
So it's not just about feeling better subjectively. Peale asserts that thinking positively actually sets in motion positive forces which bring positive results to pass. It creates an atmosphere, he says, propitious to the development of positive outcomes.
And conversely, thinking negatively actively brings about negative results. This is presented as a central mechanism for how life works.
Which brings us back yet again to visualization being absolutely crucial.
A key component of this whole positive thinking process. Peale recounts that early meeting about starting Guidepost magazine, you remember?
Yeah, where someone told him to visualize 100,000 subscribers.
Right. And Peale admits he really struggled to see that number initially. It seemed impossible. But that act of visualization, combined with prayer and practical effort, is credited in the book with the magazine's eventual success, far exceeding that initial goal, eventually reaching over 500,000 subscribers.
Wow. The creative process is summarized quite neatly in the book using 3 words, isn't it?
Yes. Visualize, prayerize, actualize.
The claim is that optimistic visualization, when combined with prayer and active faith, is the engine that inevitably leads to the actualization, the achievement of the goal.
And failure, then, in this framework, is ultimately seen as rooted internally, within the person.
Yes, fundamentally. In the error within himself, which Peale interprets as meaning thinking wrong, he even interprets the Bible phrase paths of righteousness to mean paths of right-mindedness.
Right-mindedness? Okay.
Yeah.
Like the story of the man described as a complete personality failure. Yeah, the man who apparently failed at everything he tried. Despite having a seemingly delightful personality, he kept losing jobs. Peale views this recurring pattern not as bad luck, but as a direct result of habitual wrong thinking that needed conscious correction through the disciplined practice of right thinking. It's all tied back to that internal mental and spiritual state.
It really places a tremendous amount of power, and maybe responsibility too, squarely on your own thoughts. Moving outwards a little bit from the internal state, the source also emphasizes the importance of relationships for overall well-being.
Definitely. Peale states pretty clearly that satisfactory human relationships are vital for happiness and success. He claims failure in this area will adversely affect you psychologically. But the good news, he says, is that you can learn techniques to become a well-liked person, even if you think you're naturally shy or unsocial.
Okay, so how? What's a core technique for becoming more liked?
A central idea is becoming what he calls a comfortable person.
Comfortable person.
Yeah, someone who is easygoing, natural, pleasant, kindly, genial, someone people feel they can be with without strain or pretense. Like he says, wearing an old hat or an old shoe, just comfortable to be around. It's about putting others at ease.
That makes sense. While scientific studies might list dozens of specific traits needed to be liked, Peale suggests Christianity offers one basic trait that goes a very long way.
And that is?
A sincere and forthright interest in and love for people.
Ah, sounds simple, but maybe not easy.
Right. But the book presents it as the fundamental shift needed to improve relationships.
And the anecdote about Mr. Parley illustrates that beautifully, doesn't it?
The man who was late but stopped anyway.
Yes. Despite being late for something important, Mr. Parley took the time to genuinely greet and appreciate a colored maid who was servicing rooms. He saw her as a person, not just someone doing a job. That demonstrated that sincere interest Peale talks about.
It's a great example. The source also addresses the problem of unconsciously maybe rubbing people the wrong way.
Which is often rooted, according to Peale, in being self-centered and egotistical. Maybe even liking yourself a bit too much and subtly putting others down to boot your own fragile ego. He actually calls this suffering from self-love.
Suffering from self-love, interesting phrase. So the cure is, well, the opposite of self-love.
Essentially, yes. Practicing love for others and learning to genuinely forget yourself sometimes. The anecdote of the young man who was taught this is a good illustration.
What happened with him?
He started consciously trying to see value in people he previously dismissed as just mechanical robots, like an elevator operator. And once he lost that self-centered focus, he suddenly realized the world was actually filled with interesting people.
It was a shift in his own perception.
Exactly, a powerful shift. What about specific techniques for conquering irritation or active dislike towards particular people? Does he offer anything for that?
He does. Peale suggests making an exhaustive list of everything you could possibly admire about that person you dislike, and adding to the list daily.
Wow, an exhaustive list of positives about someone you dislike. That sounds challenging.
It does. But he claims this deliberate exercise helps you discover pleasing qualities you genuinely hadn't seen before. And often, he suggests, as your perception changes, they start seeing new, better qualities in you. It can change the dynamic.
It's like actively reshaping your thoughts about them, applying that core positive thinking principle directly to a relationship.
Exactly. And there's a strong warning given against deflating other people's egos, even in subtle ways, like spoiling someone's joke or constantly correcting their story.
Yeah, don't be that person.
Right. Instead, the source advises actively building people up, making them feel good about themselves, which he claims naturally makes them love you in return.
It seems to boil down to actively focusing on the positive in others and deliberately lifting them up rather than tearing them down, even subtly. Giving strength to people.
Yes, giving strength to people is presented as a key way to receive affection back, based on the idea that people give affection to those who give strength to them.
It presents relationships as this kind of dynamic exchange, really fueled by these positive actions and attitudes originating from within you.
Okay, the book also offers guidance for one of the most difficult human experiences, dealing with heartache and grief. It includes what's literally called a prescription for heartache.
Yeah, described not as a physical ailment in the heart, but as an ache in his personality, resulting from deep grief.
And this prescription includes
Physical activity is part of it. Swimming, playing sports, getting your blood coursing. Also losing yourself in worthwhile projects and engaging in healthy, mind-relieving busyness. Keeping occupied constructively.
and not just superficial distractions, right?
No, the source specifically cautions against shallow escapism like constant partying or drinking, saying those things only temporarily deaden the pain, they don't heal it.
And importantly, it seems to validate the actual expression of grief. Doesn't say just think positive about loss.
That's a crucial point. It states that giving way to grief is a normal release. It argues against the cultural idea, maybe more prevalent then, that showing emotion is weak. Expressing grief, physically crying, sobbing is presented as a necessary way to let the emotion out and ultimately heal the wound. It's not about suppression at all.
So allow the grieving process. What the source presents as profoundly curative, though, beyond just expressing grief, is developing a different perspective on life and death itself.
Yes, gaining what it calls a sound and satisfying philosophy of life and deathlessness. Peale shares his own personal conviction quite openly here, describing it as an unshakable belief that there is no death.
No death.
That all life is indivisible, that here and hereafter are one, and that this is essentially one unobstructed universe. That's his framework.
And this belief, he says, is based on
Primarily on the Bible, which he feels gives subtle, scientific series of insights into what happens after death. Truths that are ultimately known by faith, not empirical proof. The claim is that while this kind of faith may not remove the immediate pain of grief entirely, it can lift and dissipate grief over time, provide understanding, and offer deep assurance that you haven't truly lost your loved one in an ultimate sense. Living based on this faith, he suggests, brings eventual peace and removes that deep ache. He offers 1 Corinthians 2.9, "Eye has not seen," as a comforting text in this context.
And the source includes several anecdotes presented as indications or evidence from his perspective that human spirits on both sides of death live in unbroken fellowship.
Yes, stories like the sister's confidence in eternal life, even while facing physical torture. The aunt who, as she was dying, apparently saw burned family members coming to meet her, saying, "It is all so beautiful." And H.P. Clark's near-death experience, where he describes seeing beautiful lights, kind faces, feeling immense peace, and completely losing his fear of death afterward.
Peale interprets these and other experiences, like a boy in the Korean War feeling his mother's presence strongly, a dying father seeing long-gone family members in the room, even Thomas Edison's reported last words, "It is beautiful over there." He interprets all these as signs that our loved ones are actually nearby and occasionally draw near to comfort us. He grounds this in Jesus' words, "Because I live, ye shall live also." It's presenting a very specific, faith-based understanding of death and the afterlife as a direct balm for the pain of grief.
It definitely offers a particular framework for processing loss, deeply rooted in his specific belief system.
It seems like everything we've discussed just keeps circling back to the central theme. The idea that you can draw upon a higher power to overcome problems, whether they're small annoyances or huge life challenges like grief.
That really is the ultimate assertion threaded through the entire source material we looked at, and it uses alcoholism as a particularly powerful example to drive this point home.
Right. Why alcoholism specifically? What's the connection?
Peale claims that if a power exists that can deliver a person from something as notoriously difficult and gripping as alcoholism, then this same power can help any other person to overcome any other form of defeat he may face. Alcoholism is presented as a sort of ultimate test case, proof of the accessibility and efficacy of this higher power for any problem.
That makes sense as a rhetorical strategy. And he recounts the Alcoholics Anonymous program in that context, doesn't he?
Yes, he tells the story of a friend of his who found sobriety through attending AA meetings, which happened to be held at Peale's church. The friend described feeling drawn there, almost pulled, by a power greater than myself. And at the meeting, he met men from all walks of life who possessed this tangible, vital spiritual quality, people through whom this higher power seemed to be actively flowing.
That sense of shared strength and experience, and the anecdote about Charles and Dr. Silkworth.
Another striking story. Charles, an alcoholic being treated by Dr. Silkworth, was released from the hospital at what Peale intriguingly describes as a proper psychological, spiritual, and shall we say supernatural moment.
Supernatural moment.
He apparently found himself, somewhat unplanned, at the Marble Collegiate Church, Peale's church, went inside and experienced a sudden, profound change, a spiritual awakening, essentially that led to complete sobriety from that exact moment onwards.
Wow. These stories are presented very much as victory stories, aren't they? Demonstrating this life-renewing power beyond but resident within ourselves.
Exactly, and they lead to the ultimate overarching assertion that permeates the source material. There is no problem, difficulty, or defeat that you cannot solve or overcome by faith, positive thinking, and prayer. That's the core message.
So we've really taken quite a deep dive today into these excerpts from The Power of Positive Thinking. We've explored Peale's very practical techniques, or claimed techniques, for building confidence, finding peace, boosting energy, solving problems, contributing to healing, choosing happiness, improving relationships, and overcoming worry.
And it's all framed within his specific spiritual and psychological system, this applied Christianity.
Right. The source material just consistently, relentlessly emphasizes the power of belief, of visualization, affirmation, and prayer, suggesting they aren't just, abstract concepts or wishful thinking, but actual tools that can yield tangible, measurable results when they're consistently applied.
Tools to be worked with.
It really does challenge you, the listener, to actively engage with these ideas, doesn't it? To maybe practice the techniques, even just experiment with them in your own life. As the author himself writes, these principles work when worked. The onus is on the working.
Exactly. And perhaps the most provocative thought for you to consider coming out of this deep dive is the source's fundamental underlying assertion that your inner state, your thoughts, your beliefs, your connection to that higher power, as Peale defines it, doesn't just influence your circumstances. The claim is much stronger. It's that your inner state actively, fundamentally, creates them.
Creates them.
The world you experience, according to this text, is directly shaped by the person you are on the inside, and, crucially, by the thoughts you habitually entertain day in and day out.
That is definitely something to chew on. We hope this deep dive into these powerful and sometimes controversial ideas from The Power of Positive Thinking has given you plenty of fascinating nuggets to consider, and maybe even a new perspective or tool for tackling some of life's challenges.
Hope it was useful.
Until next time, keep diving deep.